I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
This episode marks the beginning of our next true crime theme, religious leaders who kill family members. And because, at least historically, higher positions were reserved for men, this theme will revolve around male murderers.
Since all the cases we'll be covering occurred in the U.S., let's quickly touch on how many Americans view religion. According to a 2019 survey conducted by the Pew Research Center, most Americans believe religion's influence is declining. About 4 in 10 adults, including countless Christians, see this as a problem, as opposed to fewer than 2 in 10 who see this as a step in the right direction. It's hardly surprising that the majority of Americans who are at least somewhat religious and attend at least a few religious services per year believe that their own religious leaders are highly ethical. But it was a bit more shocking to learn that at large, almost 2/3 of Americans view religious leaders as having strong or very strong ethics. I guess none of these people have consumed any mainstream news in the last few decades.
That's great.
Yeah, apparently, the majority of Americans believe that medical doctors have the strongest ethics, followed by police officers, then religious leaders, who are seen as more ethical than lawyers, politicians, and journalists. Alrighty, whatever helps you sleep at night.
I don't want to say we should be suspicious of everyone, of course not. But sometimes people choose a profession that gives them power over others for nefarious purposes. One final statistic, and we'll call it a day. Because many of the cases we're going to cover see the murderers having affairs with those in their congregation, we thought it was relevant to mention that of those who attended at least a few religious services per year, almost 7 in 10 responded that they have a very or somewhat close relationship with their religious leaders. To be honest, I'm surprised it wasn't higher.
I mean, because your pastor knows your name doesn't mean you have a close relationship.
This is true. One man who had a very close relationship with his personal secretary, who also happened to attend his services with her family, including her husband, was Pastor Arthur Burton Schirmer.
On October 29th, 2008, the outside of Readers United Methodist Church on Route 715 in Jackson Township, Pennsylvania, looked as it always did. But when Secretary Marjorie Hickman walked into the church's office, she saw that things were far from normal. Her discovery would change Rosemarie Cobb's life forever and launch an investigation that finally led to the truth surrounding 2 earlier deaths, both linked to the same pastor. Rose Cobb could hardly believe what she was hearing when she found out that her brother, Joseph Musante, had been found seated behind the pastor's desk, dead from a fatal gunshot wound to the head. She rushed to Monroe County for Joe's memorial service. Her first stop was her brother's home, which he had shared with his wife of 18 years, Cindy Moyer Musante, and their 2 children.
On the night before Joe's memorial service, Rose found his house devoid of mourners and asked Cindy why no one was there. Cindy told Rose what the entire small town already knew. She was having an emotional affair with their family's pastor, the man for whom she also worked as his personal secretary, Pastor Arthur Burton, also known as A.B. Schirmer. According to Cindy, whom A.B. had childishly nicknamed C.D., they were in love. And conveniently, 3 months before Joe's death, A.B.'s wife had also died.
Cindy was having the affair, not her husband. Shouldn't fellow churchgoers attend his memorial to honor the deceased?
It's true, but I wonder if, knowing the circumstances, people just didn't want to get involved. 3 months earlier, in July 2008, AB had been driving when a deer ran onto Route 715 near Tannersville. AB and his wife were less than 2 miles from their home when he swerved to avoid it, overcorrected, and ended up hitting the guardrail instead, resulting in a crash that left his 56-year-old wife, Betty, dead. Like we all would be, Rose was more than a little suspicious to learn that the two deaths linked to AB and Cindy's affair had left the lovers free to pursue their passion. Her misgivings only grew when she discovered that Betty had been AB's second wife. It turned out that his first wife, 50-year-old Jewel, had died in April 1999 after tumbling down some stairs while vacuuming.
Or AB, how unfortunate for him.
That's one word for it.
Either AB was incredibly unlucky or he had a hand in at least some of the deaths of the people around him. To find out which was the case, let's learn more about the man in the middle of all of it. Arthur Burton Schirmer was born in Milton, Delaware. He went to Allenstown Eastern Pilgrim College and Grantham's Messiah College. It was while attending Messiah College that 20-year-old AB met Jewel Verta Bainey. Jewel also had a religious background. She was born Jewel Bainey in Kleinfellersville, Pennsylvania on October 30th, 1948, to Reverend L. Dion, interesting little Southern name,
Yeah.
R. Bainey, and Reverend Esther N. Levengood Bainey. Their faith wasn't all the two shared. And after AB and Jewel got married in 1968, they traveled to the Rawlinsville camp meeting in Lancaster County in 1975. The two youth evangelists combined their love of music with their love of God by singing duets at the yearly 2-week-long event, as families stayed in cabins and attended Bible studies, prayers, and evening church services. That sounds like my worst nightmare.
I know, that's not my idea of a good time, but you do you.
Yeah.
From 1975 to 1978, family man AB served as the pastor of United Methodist churches in the Pennsylvania communities of Bainbridge and Marietta. He and Jewel regularly returned to the Rawlinsville camp meeting with their two daughters, Amy and Julie, who were part of the youth group, and son Micah in tow. Sometimes Jewel's referenced parents even tagged along. From the late 80s to the mid 90s, Jewel kept coming back to the camp to direct the choir and play the piano as AB sang. She and AB actually recorded an album together, and the whole family would put on concerts for the community. After the United Methodist Conference transferred AB to Bethany United Methodist Church in 1978, the family of five moved to Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Jewel would continue her music teaching career in Lebanon at Our Lady of the Valley Elementary School for the next 10 years. In addition to this role, she was Bethany United Methodist Church's pianist, organist, junior choir director, director of musicals, and kindergarten Sunday school teacher. She also played the role of keyboardist in the church's praise band and supervised the kids club. She was dedicated to her students and would go on to teach private piano and voice lessons for a total of 3 decades.
My God, Jewel was a busy lady.
That she was. I'm overwhelmed just reading all of her activities.
True. Perhaps Jewel hoped devoting herself to this fresh start in Lebanon would motivate AB to recommit to their shared life too. Thus far, his loyalty had been lackluster at best. She had previously confessed to her family, only 2 years after getting married, that AB had been unfaithful. However, because the United Methodist Church does not look favorably on it, divorce wasn't an option. Did they also not look favorably on cheating, or because he was the one cheating, it was fine and probably Jewel's fault anyway?
Probably. And that's easier to hide away. Divorce brings scandal and shame to the whole community, I'm sure.
So she would remain in this problematic marriage until AB decided he wanted a true fresh start, one in which he wouldn't be encumbered by a wife. But before we get to what happened to Jewel, let's look at how AB handled his grief following his wife's accident. Over 3 decades after he had married Jewel and 22 years after he began serving as the pastor for Bethany United Methodist Church, AB moved to Pocono Township in Monroe County in 2000 and became the pastor of Readers United Methodist Church. The widower then met Betty, whom he called his best friend, and they were married on June 2nd, 2001. Less than a month later, the newlyweds moved into the second parsonage to later become a crime scene.
AB's second wife, Betty Jean Schertzer, was born in Hershey, Pennsylvania on June 28, 1952, to Jean and James Schertzer. On top of being involved at Readers United Methodist Church, after moving to Readers with AB, she became a board member of Pleasant Valley Ecumenical Network, which offers struggling families essentials like food and clothing to help them get on their feet. As for how AB's children felt about his new wife, Julie remembered feeling relieved when she heard about Betty. She was grateful that her father had found someone else to spend his life with 2 years after her mother's death. None of his children seemed to harbor any ill will towards their new stepmother. Betty's sister, Tina Foltz, and Sandy Weichel were similarly elated by the news. They both thought the pastor was a good match for her.
But AB hadn't given up his adulterous ways, and he would, once again, find himself with a wife standing in his way. However, this time around, his lover also had a family who found out about the affair in the worst possible way. 16-year-old Samantha Musante was best friends with her mother, Cindy. They shared a love of horses and would often spend time together at horse shows. So it was both a shock and a betrayal for Samantha to uncover her mother's explicit text conversations with Pastor Schirmer. And this wasn't only a blow to her. Samantha knew this would devastate her father, Joe, who had brought his family to Readers United Methodist Church in the hope that it would help with his alcohol use disorder, an addiction he had struggled with for almost his whole life. Joe had been using his skills as a carpenter to do some work around the church. He was devoting himself to his faith, completely unaware that his pastor had become far too friendly with his wife.
The moment that spelled the end of his marriage came on August 3rd, 2008, the day of Joe's 50th birthday. Both Samantha and her 10-year-old brother Alex were gone for the morning while Cindy went out grocery shopping for around an hour and a half. Joe, meanwhile, stayed home drinking. It was when she went into the kitchen around 10:30 that morning to hear Joe drunkenly call out to her, as he had done so many times before, that Cindy realized she no longer loved him. A couple of weeks later, she admitted to herself that she loved someone else, her employer and pastor. Evidence of the illicit affair could be, and was, found in their many secret emails, calls, and texts. Having found their horrifying texts, Samantha wanted to fix the situation. So she created a fake email account under the name Jean Smith and sent an email to Pastor Schirmer to get him to end the affair. However, Cindy and AB saw through the anonymous email. They called Samantha into the church's office and denied the accusation, turning the tables on Samantha to say she was the one in the wrong for imagining such a thing. Way to gaslight your daughter, Cindy.
I mean, that's horrific. Poor Samantha, first seeing the text, then trying to manage the situation as a 16-year-old, and then being called into the church and being told to your face by your mother and the creepy, I mean, in my mind, he is creepy, pastor that you didn't see what you saw.
I think we can safely say he was creepy.
Yeah. Poor Samantha could only pretend to believe their denials. She put her head down and stayed quiet about what she knew to be true. But by October 16th, 2008, months into the affair, Joe had started developing his own suspicions. And when Cindy was driving AB to one of his daughter's homes to deliver some of his late second wife's things, Joe took the opportunity to ask Samantha if her mother was in love with AB. Samantha told her father what she had found out about the affair. Learning that his wife likely loved another man understandably crushed Joe. Devastated but not defeated, he went to the parsonage to wait for his wife and AB. He confronted her and she told him she would put an end to it. That was just another lie, though, because Joe soon found out that she was continuing her secret calls to AB. Cindy herself would later admit that she never had any intention of keeping the promise she made to Joe. She no longer loved him after all, so why would she give up the man she did? But the situation only escalated after Joe threatened to kill himself and their children. I was feeling really bad for Joe until he threatens his kids.
Yeah, I don't think, as we'll see, Joe was in a good place, but that doesn't excuse you from threatening to murder your kids.
Yeah. The very day before his death, Cindy began cutting Joe off from his family by bringing the children to her sister's home and telling everyone, including Samantha, to let his many calls go to voicemail.
The following morning, Samantha listened to her father's voice for the last time when she played the message in which he tragically pleaded, "If you love me at all, please call me back." Only hours later, Joe was found dead on the desk he had unknowingly built for the man his wife chose over him. To some, though, this wasn't a tragedy at all. AB, for instance, thought things had worked out for the best. He would later tell Betty's sister, Tina Foltz, that Joe did the pair a favor by killing himself. With the last spousal obstacle to their affair removed, AB and Cindy's previously emotional affair turned sexual less than a month after Joe's death. AB had no idea that this burgeoning relationship would soon see him losing almost everything.
Do you believe that the relationship didn't become sexual until Joe's death?
Not really, but the pastor had to protect his image to some degree. I mean, what is it? You shall not covet your neighbor's wife? Maybe that commandment only applies to sex?
I mean, you aren't supposed to have lustful thoughts or desires either.
Yeah, it doesn't look like that was the case because the first loss was AB's career. His sinful desires had put his job in jeopardy because once Rose Cobb, Joe's sister, found out about AB and Cindy's affair, she went to the bishop of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Good on her.
Yeah. In the wake of Rose's information, Bishop Peggy Johnson made a complaint against AB. This pressure forced the pastor to resign from Readers United Methodist Church only weeks after Joe's suicide in November 2008. Having been in this role in various churches across central and eastern Pennsylvania, this would be the last post the pastor of almost 40 years would ever hold.
Which is what he deserves.
Too true.
Still, AB wasn't just going to walk away from his faith. After handing in his ministerial credentials in March 2009, he joined up with two others to create an evangelical singing group called Barrowing. I hope I said that right, which is the name of a group in the book of Acts who were of noble character and integrity. I mean, really? Really noble character and integrity. I'm assuming he's not the type to look within himself. Anywho,
No.
yeah. As for a more stable option that could pay the bills, AB also began working as the director of Lebanon Elm Street program, which revitalizes neighborhoods in the city, a position he obtained because of his communication skills. However, Rose was determined that AB wouldn't get yet another fresh start. She was going to make sure AB faced justice. So she alerted the police to the three dead bodies surrounding the former pastor. I feel like Rose is the heroine of the story.
She really is.
When Detective Jim Wagner from the Pocono Township Police Department took up the case, he thought Rose's suspicions were more than justified. It was difficult to overlook that right around the time AB and Cindy officially began their affair, first his wife Betty died unexpectedly. Then, after finding out about his wife's infidelity, Joe was next. Although the Pennsylvania State Police thought Joe Musante's death had all the hallmarks of a suicide, Detective Wagner decided to dig deeper. However, the second look didn't turn up any inconsistencies.
The small shards of glass on the bottom of Joe's shoes matched up with him having shattered the door's glass window to get in, only to have to step on the pieces when entering, embedding them in the treads of his shoes. Blood wasn't found anywhere it shouldn't have been either. Everything was consistent with Joe having been the one to shoot himself in the head before slumping over the desk and dropping the 380 Beretta at his feet. Beyond all the evidence at the scene pointing to Joe having been the only one in the room, the two people with the most to gain from his sudden demise had solid alibis. Cindy was with her children, and AB was confirmed to have been an hour's drive from Readers. So, even if Joe had gone to the church with the intention of confronting AB that night for the second time, since he had previously accused AB of having an affair with his wife 13 days earlier, AB seemed to have avoided the incident by going out of town. This trip was more than convenient, though, because AB had known the confrontation was coming. Cindy had warned AB that her husband and his gun were missing. When he was nowhere to be found, Joe tragically decided to use the weapon to take his own life. Foregoing the trip to the Allenstown office of AB's superiors he had planned to make in order to file a formal complaint against the pastor. Ultimately, both Rose and Detective Wagner accepted that Joe really had taken his own life. But even if one death was exactly as it appeared to be, that didn't mean the other two were.
Detective Wagner started by looking closer at Betty's death. He learned that after her death had been classified as an accident resulting from a motor vehicle collision, the coroner decided an autopsy was unnecessary, and AB's second wife was cremated the following day. Having reopened this quickly closed case, Detective Wagner started examining what supposedly led up to the accident 3 months earlier. AB had claimed that around 1:50 in the morning of July 15th, 2008, Betty had woken with such severe jaw pain that they left for the hospital for this joint condition flare up. AB had been driving at 45 to 55 miles per hour when a deer ran onto the road. He swerved to avoid a collision but ended up losing control of the vehicle and hitting the guardrail instead. The first person to come across AB's crashed 2007 PT Cruiser was Stan Dickerson. Stan was on his way home when he stopped to find out what had happened. Stan remembered that AB had turned on the light and had seen his wife's injuries, which had been so severe she appeared unconscious, as well as the blood around her, but that the pastor hardly seemed bothered. Always a telltale sign.
It seems like if you've gone to the trouble of staging someone's death, you should also go to the trouble of acting like you care. When Stan asked if he had called for help, AB said he hadn't. Blind to the cell phone in the vehicle, AB claimed that he had simply cradled Betty in an attempt to revive her. So, Stan called 911 and reported the crash, the woman's concerning state, and the man's unscathed appearance. Paramedics were on the scene minutes later. Even though they were racing to get Betty, who was unconscious and struggling to breathe, to Lehigh Valley Hospital Cedar Crest Trauma Center, they still clocked AB's disinterested demeanor from the driver's seat, the superficial damage to the car, and the lack of any object in the passenger side of the car that could account for Betty's severe brain, skull, facial, and possible neck injuries and profuse bleeding. One of these paramedics would later testify that she couldn't explain the significant bruising on Betty's leg and above her eye or the blood coating her head, given the lack of damage to the interior of the PT Cruiser. Even the small crack to the windshield didn't match up with Betty's head crashing into it. Her husband, on the other hand, was in remarkably good shape with only head and neck pain. Still, maybe her husband had been too traumatized to react how the EMTs expected, which would explain his disinterest at least. AB did seem to be coming out of it when he called his daughter Amy to deliver the news, as Amy remembered him tearfully admitting, "I don't know what to do."
Betty's sisters, Tina Foltz and Sandy Weichel, were in a similar state of shock when they reached the hospital and saw Betty with two gashes to the right side of her head and a wound on the left. The doctors told them that Betty, who had been married to AB for 7 years, would never recover from the serious injuries she had sustained. And at 12:12 the morning after the accident, she was taken off life support. While some thought it was odd that AB didn't cry when he was informed that she was gone, Amy remembered the time she found her father alone and distressed, which made her think that he was hiding his inner turmoil in front of others. I'm sure she isn't going to immediately think he had something to do with the crash, and she wants to find a valid explanation for his lack of emotion.
That does seem like a normal reaction.
When the hospital coroner asked AB to recount exactly what happened in the accident, he said that the PT Cruiser had crashed into the guardrail. Both the front and rear of the vehicle were impacted, which led to Betty being thrown around and crashing into the windshield, seatbelt post, and rear view mirror as they spun. The pastor added that Betty wasn't wearing her seatbelt, which was why she flew around the car and had such serious injuries. The coroner's office didn't ask why Betty wasn't wearing her seatbelt and soon called the case closed, even though the injuries don't match the accident.
As for AB's explanation for why his wife wasn't buckled in, well, the story changed depending on who he was telling it to. He told Bishop Peggy Johnson that Betty's seatbelt had become unbuckled due to the impact of the crash. Bishop Johnson, incidentally, also happened to be the superior Rose went to about AB and Cindy's affair. He told his daughters that Betty had just unbuckled her seatbelt to readjust into a more comfortable position when the deer ran onto the road. He actually claimed that he had glanced from the road for just a second to look at Betty taking off her seatbelt and returned his attention to find the deer, which, in my uncharitable mind, seems a bit like he's saying Betty distracted him, so it's partly her fault they crashed because he would have had more time to react if his eyes had remained on the road.
He needs to throw a little victim blaming in there.
Might as well add it to the mix. However, when AB told Betty's sister Tina that she hadn't ever buckled in, Tina pushed back, saying Betty always wore a seatbelt. He then came up with a new, far more outlandish story, claiming that Betty had recently gotten into the habit of playing a little game where she wouldn't buckle in as soon as she climbed into the passenger seat. Instead, she wanted to see how far they would have to drive before the alert sounded. After Tina appropriately commented on how utterly implausible that sounded, AB said he knew it didn't sound like her sister, but that was nonetheless what had happened.
Wow, that's some grade A level bullshit.
Isn't it?
Tina and Sandy also gave Betty's quick cremation the side eye. Tina remembered that Betty hadn't wanted to be cremated, but understandably, when her husband told them shortly after her death that that was her wish, they didn't contradict him. However, their willingness to go along with the pastor's confusing statements changed when news of Joe's suicide broke. As willing as Detective Wagner was to dig deeper to get to the truth, he was at a disadvantage with the case because it was initially ruled an accident. Much of the evidence had been lost. However, even 4 months later, Detective Wagner knew something was off about the crash based on the photos from the scene. Despite AB's story about losing control of the vehicle, there were no skid marks or any indication that he had made any attempt to swerve or stop the car. In addition to the scenes surrounding it, photos of the car also held clues. The minimal damage to the car completely contradicted the former pastor's claim that the vehicle had flipped. In actuality, the airbags hadn't even deployed. Between this fact and the minor damage to the PT Cruiser's front end, it was more than clear that it had hit the guardrail at a low speed. To discover the approximate speed, accident reconstruction experts from Penn State created two animated reconstructions of the crash, one in which the vehicle was traveling at 20 miles per hour and the other with the car going 40 miles per hour.
With soil composition, the construction of the guardrail, and crash data from the vehicle taken into account, the 20-mile-per-hour reconstruction showed the PT Cruiser hitting the guardrail and coming to a stop. But at 40 miles per hour, it crashed through the guardrail and continued into the woods. If the pastor's story about driving at 45 to 55 miles per hour was true, the car would have been found among the trees. Since the vehicle only moved one of the beams holding up the guardrail around a foot before being stopped by it, it was likely that it was only traveling at around 20 to 25 miles per hour.
just love when science provides the truth.
Signs for the win, always. More contrary evidence to Betty's severe head trauma was the car's condition after the fender bender, including the still working headlights. It was actually in good enough shape that AB could have kept on driving, although he said he didn't realize this.
Detective Wagner also discovered several incongruous bloodstains within the car, such as multiple drops that had begun to be absorbed by the seat cushions. If AB's retelling of the crash was to be believed, Betty would have flown all around the inside of the car, meaning there would be blood all around where she was sitting. And there was. There was blood on the passenger seat, floorboard, and dashboard. However, the absorbed drops on her seat cushion contradicted AB's narrative that fresh blood was dripping from her recent wounds. This drying blood suggested that Betty had been placed on top of it and left there as the cushion continued to absorb the drops. Additionally, the blood on the floorboard matched up with where Betty's head was resting in the reclined seat. But the amount showed that she was in that position for a substantial amount of time after receiving her severe injuries. Forensics experts analyzed the photos an auto damage appraiser had taken of the car and determined that the blood evidence was consistent with Betty having been bleeding prior to the collision.
With AB's story about his second wife's death falling apart, Detective Wagner chose to look more closely into the circumstances surrounding his first wife, Jules' death. He learned that AB had said that he went for a run on April 23rd, 1999, and when he got back to their home at 915 Skyline Drive in North Lebanon Township, Pennsylvania at 2:15 p.m., AB found Jewel at the bottom of the basement stairs with the shop vac's extension cord around her ankle and blood spreading from her head. He guessed that she must have fallen down the flight of stairs she had been vacuuming, and he called 911. After arriving at Penn State Milton S. Hershey Medical Center, Jewel went into a coma due to a skull fracture that would have necessitated a minimum of 750 pounds of either force or pressure. Having put together the choir at Our Lady of the Valley, the elementary school at which she taught, Jewel had been getting the students ready for a concert, but she would never get to watch the final performance. Jewel, who had been married to AB for 31 years, died the day after she was admitted to the hospital from her traumatic brain injury.
Jonathan, or John Bainey, Jules' brother, decided to go to the parsonage a couple of days after seeing his sister's bruised eyes, swollen face, and 10 damaged knuckles in the hospital. Once in the home his sister would never return to, John saw that the blood had been cleaned from the basement wall and floor. AB said the paramedics had cleaned the scene. They don't do that, ever.
How would that fall into their job description?
And one of the paramedics who attended to Jewel confirmed that their job is to help the patient, not to destroy possible evidence. Beyond that, the scene wasn't immediately secured because police were only called once Jewel had arrived at the hospital. It turned out that AB hadn't gone to the hospital with his wife. Rather than riding in the ambulance with her, he had stayed behind to clean the scene. He then proceeded to go to the wrong hospital as Jewel was being put on life support. He is just such a wicked prick and not nearly as smart as he thinks he is.
I'm not sure I've come across a killer that doesn't think they're smarter than they are.
That's too true. Grappling with disbelief alongside his grief, John went to his father and they shared their doubts about Jules' supposed accident. After John reached out to a police officer friend, he spoke to a detective who had Jules' body taken from Roland Funeral Home for an autopsy.
A cardiologist at the time looked over Jules' organs to see if any were viable for transplant and thought she might have had a heart attack, then fallen. But the medical examiner, Dr. Wayne Ross, found no signs of heart disease during the autopsy of the partially embalmed body. Additionally, the heart vessels that were eventually transplanted proved his findings. Instead, he discovered that Jewel had 14 areas of impact to her head. He was left scratching his head as to why Jewel had multiple skull fractures but no other major injuries. If she had truly fallen down the stairs, she would have had other serious injuries, such as to her ribs or pelvis. She should have at least broken her wrists or hands from trying to protect her face from the ground. Rather than these expected wounds, she had several minor scrapes and bruises to her torso and arms, which included some in the shape of a handprint. Because of this, Dr. Ross classified her cause of death as undetermined.
Even so, investigators didn't pay much attention to Dr. Ross's questions about Jules' unlikely fall and closed the case. How does this continually happen? Do the investigators really think that they know more than the doctor about her injuries, or are they just lazy?
Do the concerns somehow get missed? I just don't know.
Unlike Jules' brother and father, whose suspicions only grew when AB barely looked at his wife's body at the wake and continued to display little emotion as the service got underway, Amy and Julie, AB and Jules' daughters, understandably believed their father's story about it being an accident. After Detective Wagner requested Jules' file and saw yet more question marks around the death of another of the former pastor's wives in December 2008, 9 years after Jules' death and 5 months after Betty's demise, he was granted a warrant to look around AB's parsonage and Readers. Empty since AB had been forced to resign, the team was instructed to look for any signs of altercation inside the home he and Betty had lived in beside the church. And in AB's garage, Detective Wagner spotted what they had all been looking for: blood on the concrete floor.
An effort had been made to clean it away, as indicated by the traces of white marks, but the glowing luminol drew Detective Wagner's eyes to the trail of blood marking a path from the back door he had just stepped through to where the car's passenger side door would have been when considering how AB always pulled into the garage. DNA test results would prove that this blood was 20 trillion times more likely to belong to Betty than anyone else, confirming Detective Wagner's theory that she had been bleeding before she was placed in the car.
Look at that, Detective Wagner actually doing his job.
He is not just clocking in and out. Although the blood showed that she had been assaulted somewhere else, only testing in the garage could be conducted due to the months since her death. Presumably, the blood evidence elsewhere was too degraded. However, it was clear that Betty was taken through the garage's back door and dragged beside the car, all while bleeding heavily onto the garage floor, as indicated by the large area of blood near the usual spot of the car's passenger door. The fact that she had been put in the car after she had been fatally injured proved that AB had staged the car crash in an attempt to cover up the murder.
As Detective Wagner and his team continued looking for any other clues in AB's home, the Pennsylvania State Police began interrogating AB about the evidence that had just been discovered. At first, he stuck to his story about Betty only bleeding in the car. Then he changed his tune to say that they had been moving wood from the garage to the backyard when the stack had fallen onto and cut both AB and Betty. Investigators saw the stack of wood near the backyard's fire pit, but when they looked close, they discovered several local newspapers underneath. These newspapers were dated from September 21st, 2008, more than 2 months after Betty's death. This meant AB might have moved the wood, but Betty certainly hadn't. The stories in those papers would have been little more than ideas when Betty was still alive in July. It's like he put no effort into his lies. They make zero sense.
You would think a pastor would be better at telling a coherent narrative.
Yeah. A year after Betty's death, investigators were working to prove her murder, and AB had been made to give up his job and the parsonage that came with it. However, with this change in his living situation, AB became even more involved with Cindy, who he had continued seeing all this time.
In the beginning, he would just stay the night. Then he started staying with her and her daughter Samantha on the weekends. But by January 2010, He had moved into the house Joe had built for his family. A couple of months after he had made Cindy's place his new home, Samantha made the decision to find a new one for herself.
Of course she did, and AB and Cindy were probably happy about that.
Unfortunately, as we've seen, Samantha wasn't her mom's main concern. On the day Samantha turned 18, she grabbed her stuff and headed out. It was then that she learned that AB, the man her mother was infatuated with, was under investigation for murder. That investigation came to a head when Betty's death was classified as a homicide on July 8th, 2010, after Lehigh County Coroner Scott Grimm and medical examiner Dr. Samuel Land concluded that her injuries were not consistent with a car crash. Now aware of AB's violent nature, when Cindy texted Samantha, with whom she had somewhat reconnected, in the summer of 2010 to say he had proposed, Samantha was fearful for her mother's safety and immediately called the Pocono Township Police Department. After hearing what she had to say, Detective Wendy Surface from the Monroe County, Pennsylvania District Attorney's Office shared Samantha's concerns about something triggering AB to kill his soon to be third wife.
Although they had been steadily building their case up to this point, this news forced the police to take action to prevent murder number three. Only weeks after AB and Cindy became engaged on September 13th, 2010, police arrested AB at his fiance's home for murdering Betty. AB was denied bail and was left stewing in his cell while Dr. Wayne Ross, who had conducted Jules' autopsy in 1999 and classified her death as undetermined, was asked to help with Betty's case by the Monroe County DA. With no body or autopsy report to examine because of AB's rush to cremate her, Dr. Ross began poring over the medical records that detailed the injuries she was found with after the car crash.
His initial theory was that she had been assaulted and died due to the resulting traumatic brain injury. So he created 3D renderings of the injuries using the CAT scans taken to examine the numerous facial and skull fractures she had been found with. What struck him most about Betty's wounds was that they were almost identical to Jules'. She too had two linear tears to the right side of her head. He couldn't help thinking that it seemed almost too far fetched to believe that Jewel and Betty had both been married to AB, had both received these lacerations to the right side of their heads, and had both died from traumatic brain injuries that didn't match the circumstances of their deaths. Providing more evidence for the theory that both deaths were intentional, the same year AB was arrested for murdering Betty, another cardiologist concluded that Jewel's heart damage was due to her brain trauma rather than the reason she fell and hit her head.
I realize it is years later that they are looking into Jules' death, but I'm impressed when an investigation goes deep. Even though there is no body and no autopsy to review, Dr. Ross pores over medical records and creates a 3D rendering of her skull. It's a shame that this isn't done more frequently. I mean, due to lack of funds, lack of investigative interest, or something else.
It is. I do think a lack of resources poses a problem in many cases.
Yeah, definitely. With these findings in mind, a couple of months after AB was arrested for killing his second wife, Dr. Ross visited the parsonage that AB and Jewel had lived in when he had been the pastor for Bethany United Methodist in Lebanon, and in which Jewel had fallen. Investigators wanted to see if it was possible that she had sustained her injuries by falling down the flight of stairs, like the former pastor had claimed. To test this, a biomedical engineering firm carried out tests in which they covered the heads of crash test dummies in chalk so they could see where the heads hit the stairs. In every single instance, the places struck on the dummies' heads didn't match with Jewel's skull fractures. Dr. Ross then theorized that Jewel had been stuck repeatedly on the head with a long cylindrical object, like a pipe or crowbar, and seeing Betty's extremely similar injuries on the 3D renderings, Dr. Ross concluded that she had been killed the same way.
However, Brandon Reich, AB's attorney, called the stair experiments junk science because test dummies were not made to be used in recreations of falls to test where a human being would have been injured. In spite of his assertion that no peer reviewed articles or studies for this type of recreation existed, on January 24th, 2012, nearly 13 years later, Jules' manner of death was changed from undetermined to homicide by the Dauphin County Coroner's Office. Unfortunately, this was 8 years too late for her father's suspicions to have been proven correct after his death in 2004. Nonetheless, the rest of her family had to be informed. So, a detective was tasked with telling her adult daughters, Julie Campbell and Amy Wolfgang. This detective went to Julie's home to explain that her mother had not died from a heart attack or a fall, but rather had been killed by her father.
Julie, sadly but understandably, completely rejected Dr. Ross's claims. Despite her disbelief, the DA was able to see the similarities between his two wives' deaths, and in September 2012, AB was indicted by a grand jury for Jules' murder too. But Brandon Reich, AB's defense attorney, was going all in on AB's tall tales, claiming the accidents, like those that had befell his two wives, were incredibly commonplace. And Mike Mancuso, the prosecutor for Betty's case, knew that it was possible the jury could buy that narrative given how circumstantial the case was. He also knew, though, that the jury would have an easier time believing the evidence pointing to Betty having been murdered if they knew about Jules' suspicious demise as well. Even though Brandon Reich fought to have the details of Jules' death excluded, the judge ultimately agreed to allow them to be presented to the jury. Good. It seems way too often that we hear about evidence from prior crimes being excluded, and the jury is none the wiser.
And it upsets me each and every time. With the trial approaching, AB was forced to cancel his plans of going back to Lancaster County to perform with Berean, his evangelical musical group, later that year. But there was something or someone he could count on: Cindy. While AB was held in the Monroe County Correctional Facility as he awaited trial, Cindy deposited $600 each month into his commissary fund, and every night he phoned her from the prison. When his trial began for Betty's murder on January 8th, 2013, over 4 years since Joe Musante died by suicide in October 2008, Arthur Burton Schirmer, dubbed the Sinister Minister by prosecutor Mike Mancuso, was greeted by the sight of Cindy every single day.
The world of denial she was living in, it's unreal.
I would feel bad for her if she hadn't treated Samantha so badly. Rose Cobb, Joe's sister, believed that AB found vulnerable people to prey on, and Mike Mancuso played up this predatory image of him by calling AB a wolf in shepherd's clothing. The prosecutor used what investigators had found on the former pastor's computers to reveal the state of AB and Betty's marriage, including one email in which AB lamented Betty's lack of interest in sex since going through menopause, which had resulted in them not having been intimate in 2 years.
Brandon Reich chose to acknowledge his client wasn't without sin in his closing argument, conceding that AB cheated on Betty with Cindy while claiming that didn't give him a motive to murder his wife. However, his daughter Julie went so far as to say that he still loved and missed both of his wives.
Which I guess is what you'd have to believe when the reality of your father having murdered your mother is too much to bear.
I do understand the disbelief that your father, if there had been no signs of abuse, murdered your mother up to a point. When the injuries don't match the accident, and this isn't simply speculation, but actually analyzed and presented by a doctor, your unwavering support is seriously misplaced.
Sadly.
Speaking of AB sins, we should mention that there was further undisclosed evidence that AB had also cheated on Jewel with another female member of his congregation who had come to him for marital advice, which does seem to indicate a pattern of killing his wives once he found a new lover. Although we're sure the financial difficulties AB and Jewel were allegedly having only added fuel to the fire. Reportedly, money was also a driving factor in Betty's murder, since AB was said to have commented that there was no way he'd divorce her and be forced to give up half of what he had to her. Gotta love that a congregant comes to him for marital advice, and instead of advising her, he sleeps with her.
Was sex what was lacking in the marriage? So he, giver that he is, fixes it by offering it himself? I feel like no.
AB, volunteer as tribute.
Nice reference.
Beyond the circumstantial evidence, like although AB said the crash occurred because a deer ran onto the road, he still chose to store Betty's ashes in an urn decorated with a mountain scene that included a deer.
Which I don't think proves he's guilty, but it's not a great look to offhandedly comment on it as he did.
The prosecution also presented the jury with the damning evidence at their disposal. This included the blood absorbed by the seat cushion, the bloody path found in the garage, and a stack of quarters in the PT Cruiser center console coin holder, from which only a couple of coins had been dislodged, supposedly after a 45 to 55 mile per hour crash.
The most moving piece of testimony given by the almost 60 witnesses during the 11-day trial was Samantha Musantes. Joe's daughter described AB's desire to be with Cindy and his need to get rid of his inconvenient wife. But just as she had used her time in the witness box to speak directly to the man who had destroyed her family, when it was his turn, AB repositioned his chair to stare directly at the jury as he steadfastly proclaimed his innocence, relying on the charisma he had been known for as a pastor to save him from prison.
I don't think he should have been able to do that. I mean, imagine if a drug kingpin was allowed to turn his chair, really anybody, turn his chair and look at the jury. That is completely inappropriate.
Yeah, if I were on the jury, that would have definitely made me uncomfortable. AB elaborated on the story of the woodpile from the garage falling and cutting Betty, changing a few details to suit the evidence everyone now knew about. He said that after they had transferred the first load outside, some wood fell on Betty while they were in the process of moving more. Instead of claiming that wood had fallen on both of them, AB's new narrative featured only Betty becoming injured when the wood slipped and cut her forearm. AB explained the bloody trail by stating that Betty had initially walked the garage's bay door before turning back and exiting through the back door. She then made her way into the home's kitchen, where AB helped tend to the bleeding wound. He claimed that he later went back to finish moving the wood by himself and wiped Betty's blood from the garage floor while he was sweeping it. Even though this provided a reason for the white marks, the prosecutor highlighted the changes in the oddness of Betty changing direction in an area she was familiar with.
AB also now said that after Betty had undone her seatbelt and the deer ran onto the right side of the road, he had put one arm out to protect her as he went around the deer. Betty had then been jostled from side to side as AB swerved 2 different times before hitting the guardrail. He claimed he had been trying to help Betty when Stan Dickerson showed up and called 911. Yet, in spite of these new details that no other evidence or witnesses could corroborate, AB allegedly knew he had failed, saying to his deputy escort on his way back to his cell that he was sure of his looming conviction and life sentence. And he wasn't wrong. After an hour and a half deliberation, the jury came back into the courtroom and found AB guilty of murdering Betty and tampering with evidence. Having been found guilty of murder in the first degree, AB was given the mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dr. Ross's theory was proven to be spot on when the Poconos jury came to the conclusion that AB had used an object like a crowbar to beat Betty over the head before putting her into the PT Cruiser and causing a low speed accident to mask the murder. With justice delivered with her murderer's conviction, Nate Novak, Betty's son, visited the parsonage where his mother had been beaten to death before going to the site of the crash to leave behind the rosary beads his mother had given to him as a child.
As for Rose Cobb, the heroine of the story who lit a fire under investigators to look closer at the deaths surrounding the former United Methodist pastor, she credits her brother for pushing her to keep going. She said, "I'm only doing what he couldn't do for himself." While Rose was persuaded by the evidence to accept Joe's suicide, Abe's conviction didn't change his daughter's minds about him being innocent. And their family only expanded when Julie and Amy, who were both now in their 40s, found a surrogate mother in 49-year-old Cindy. Along with visiting AB, whom she never ended up marrying, at the state correctional institution at Greene, where he's been held since March 2013, Cindy made a habit of seeing them and their children in a way their father no longer could.
Okay, that's weird. You had an affair with the pathetic pastor. He's a convicted killer, and you have somehow taken it upon yourself to play surrogate mom to his kids?
I get she feels like a part of the family now, since their shared belief in his innocence has essentially isolated them and made them band together, but it's all just sad and upsetting.
It sure is.
And Cindy's integration into the Schirmer family came at a price. Samantha, who formerly described her mother as her best friend, no longer has any sort of relationship with her. Cindy's inability to see the former pastor for who he is made it difficult to reconcile this deluded woman with the mother she used to rely on.
This may be probably the third time I've said it, but poor Samantha. It's sad that she lost both her father and her mother because of her mother's actions, and her disillusioned mother has chosen to believe his lies and integrate herself into his family.
Joe had been struggling for a long time, and I'm sure that took a toll on the family. Then, though, Samantha lost both parents. I really feel for her.
Cindy's and his children fervent belief in Abe's innocence is all the harder to fathom because 18 months after he was found guilty of murdering Betty on June 30th, 2014, 66-year-old AB pled no contest to third-degree murder in Jules' case. This plea is not an admission of guilt, but authorization for the court to treat the defendant as guilty without holding a trial. His no contest plea entered, AB was given the maximum 20 to 40 years to be served consecutively to his life sentence, all on top of a $50,000 fine. Nonetheless, he continues to deny his guilt. AB said he took the plea deal to prevent his daughters from having to endure another trial. They remain convinced that he was wrongly accused in both cases and even pleaded for leniency along with their husbands when he was sentenced for murdering their mother. Similarly, their brother Micah wrote in his written statement, "To us, it is impossible to believe he is a killer."
And I do get why you would choose denial in that situation.
It's true. However, John Bainey, Jules' brother, said, "It's closure. A.B. Schirmer will die in prison, and that's what I was after." Which is fair enough because, as Tina Foles, Betty's sister, said, "I can't help but think that he should have been put away in 1999, and I would have my dear sister with me." She's, of course, correct. Fortunately, despite it being a poor consolation prize, AB's appeal against his conviction for murdering Betty was denied. This appeal had seen him arguing that neither the details of Jules' death nor the details of Joe's suicide should have been presented at trial. But both of these arguments were decided to be without merit, and his sentence was upheld.
Interestingly, this appeal saw his defense arguing that Jules' death shouldn't have been discussed because the details of her death were markedly different from those of Betty's. The argument was that this made Schirmer's case different from the one argued in Commonwealth versus Buczkowski, in which it was ruled that Timothy Buczkowski's former wife's death was similar to his current wife's demise. This similarity underscored that in both instances, neither had died accidentally. They were both deliberately murdered by Tim Buczkowski. And because I love to fall down a rabbit hole, here's a brief overview of those cases. The body of Tim's first wife, Elaine, was found on November 4th, 1990, in the bathtub of their Greensboro, North Carolina home. Then, almost exactly 4 years later, on November 7th, 1994, the body of his second wife, Mary Ann, was discovered in a hot tub in Ross Township, Pennsylvania. As for how Elaine and Marianne, two healthy women in their 30s, ended up dead, Tim said they had been drinking before getting into the water. He then reported that he had found both his wives unconscious, implying that they had drowned while he wasn't around. In actuality, Tim had argued with both shortly before their deaths, and both police forces clocked the scratch marks covering his torso, arms, and hands after both of the women were found not to have drowned, but to have been asphyxiated.
Like Tim, AB was the last person to have seen either Jewel or Betty alive, and the similarities between the deaths of both men's two wives proved that neither had died accidentally, as both men claimed. Like with the reported financial motive AB had for both of his wife's murders, investigators learned that the ice cream business Tim and Elaine owned was not doing well, and unsurprisingly, neither was their marriage. They also found out that Tim had bought a $25,000 life insurance policy on Elaine. Despite Tim's claims, the autopsy performed on Elaine discovered that she had not been drinking and that her lungs were not filled with water. Having not been charged with Elaine's murder, Tim was free to live his life, which included finding a new wife. He ran into Marianne Ross at a singles event put on by their church nearly a year after his first wife's death. In 1994, the same year they married, Tim supposedly found his second wife immersed in water and unconscious, this time in a hot tub rather than a bathtub. Like with Elaine, in spite of Tim's claims, there was no evidence that Marianne had been drinking. Because he's all kinds of classy, Tim had also used the money from their wedding presents to take out a $100,000 life insurance policy on Marianne, which was 4 times larger than the one he had taken out on Elaine.
After Marianne was found to have died from asphyxiation resulting from manual strangulation, the medical examiner realized that the marks on Elaine's abdomen were from Tim holding her over the side of the tub to push the air from her lungs, and asphyxiation was ruled to be her cause of death too. Because I'd never heard about this method of murder before, I looked into different types of asphyxiation. They're the types we've all heard of, like smothering and manual strangulation, among others. But there is also compression or compressive asphyxia. This is a specific kind of mechanical asphyxiation in which pressure is applied to the abdomen or chest. It could occur from someone putting their body weight on a person's chest, but holding someone over the side of a bathtub would also result in compression that obstructs necessary respiratory movements, like lung expansion while breathing. It was this intentional lack of oxygen that was Elaine's cause of death.
Because I also enjoy a rabbit hole, this is how George Floyd died when Officer Dickhead put continued and prolonged pressure on his neck and back, preventing airflow and blood flow to his brain. Maybe why he continually said, I can't breathe.
Which Officer Dickhead repeatedly chose to ignore as he murdered him.
Too right. Tim was later found guilty of both his wife's deaths and he was sentenced to life in prison. All that to say, AB had plenty of inspiration from which to draw in staging his wife's deaths as accidents, and his narcissism was on full display in saying the circumstances of his wife's deaths were completely different, so the evidence of Jules' death shouldn't have been allowed at the trial of Betty's murder.
It's almost like he was arguing, look, I at least tried to stage my wife's deaths differently. Shouldn't I get some credit for that? Can I somehow save myself with my murderous ingenuity?
Is every killer a narcissist?
That does seem to be the case more often than not.
Fortunately, as we said, AB's appeal was denied, and he will hopefully remain in prison until his death so that he will be unable to ever kill another wife.
And I would say hopefully his children and Cindy come to see the truth, but I can understand how it would be easier to stomach the lie that he was wrongfully convicted, as opposed to the truth that the man they loved and a man of God was capable of murdering multiple women for money and sex. And just to let you all know, we're taking next week off to visit family, but we'll be back the week after to continue our series on religious leaders who kill family members when we discuss the case of Reverend Michael Tabb.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyinglytypicalpod@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifyingly Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifyingly Typical Pod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you soon.